Hey everybody, welcome back to Life Unpotted Community Series. We're very excited to be here with you today, and we have a great question brought to you by a listener. Before we jump into reading that question, I wanted to wish you all a happy holiday week. Hope you're finding time to relax. Find some time to reflect and some time to look into the new year. And overall, just take care of yourself and just unplug. I think there's so much that comes from being able to just have nothing at all to do. So hopefully you find some space to create that reflective nothing to do space for yourself. And on that note, want to remind you all that we are having our community Zoom next week, January 2nd, just right into the new year. This is going to be a great place for you to reflect on the past year, look forward to the next year, and you know that New Year's energy is always really exciting. So would love to see as many of you there as possible. Sophie and I will both be there. And just a reminder, it's at 6 p.m. Central, 7 p.m. Eastern. You can sign up in the link in our show notes. And we look forward to seeing you there in the new year. So now to get into our question for the day. How do you deal with impulses or distracting thoughts when you're trying to be present, journal, or meditate?
I think this is a good question because I feel like, naturally I'm thinking about the times where I sit down to meditate and all the racing thoughts are coming in. All of the racing thoughts are flooding my mind, or I'm trying to journal, or I'm trying to do anything that requires me to be present, or I'm writing up the newsletter, or I'm podcasting. I'm doing something that requires me to be grounded, but I have so many thoughts that are getting in the way. And sometimes that would mean I am writing the newsletter and that impulse comes over me that I need to check my phone. I want to go on Instagram. And it's interesting, I've really seen that sometimes those impulses can be very, very sneaky because you don't realize it's an impulse, right? You experience a thought arise, you experience it coming up, and you think, okay, my mind's telling me I'm going to go on my phone right now as I'm trying to focus on this task. So that must mean that I should go on my phone. And the phone one has been really interesting for me because I've noticed, or rather I've created that space between the thought, between the impulse, and I started saying, okay, I have this habit, right, of checking my phone every XYZ time, and it's something I do very often. So I became aware of that, and I started to say, let me try to separate myself from that. Let me try to not cave in to this thought and see what happens. And I think that is one of the most powerful things we can do on this journey of trying to separate ourselves from our thoughts, from our mind, from the impulses, is that we get that impulse that says, do this thing, but we don't do it. We let ourselves find out what happens when we don't go down the thought, when we don't join the train, when we don't get on the thought train and we watch it pass the station. And something really amazing happens there, which is you, the observer of the experience, you, the observer of your thoughts, recognize that you are the observer, right? Because when we are grabbing the phone and not separating ourselves from the impulse or the thought, we don't recognize that we have the option to do so. So I think one of the first things I would say is that it's about training our mind, right? It's about creating that discipline. And I really do think we train our mind, and this is where the science comes in, of our pathways change. And I've seen this in my life of just like, I don't want to reach for my phone as much as I used to. It's interesting, we think of impulses of like, oh, I'm journaling, I'm distracted, but it's the same thing of, I'm not going to judge myself as much as I normally do. I'm not going to feed into this thought. When we are able to cultivate the awareness to recognize that any thought, when it comes up in the way it does, and I think for me, the way I differentiate anxious fear thought is any thought that comes with urgency, any thought that comes with, I need to do something other than what I'm doing right now. Because the reality of it is, when we're really grounded in the moment, when we're really here, there are no thoughts that need to guide that, because we are able to journal, we're able to meditate, we're able to write the newsletter or podcast without thinking. And that's where we enter flow state. So I think one of the first things I would say is really, number one, recognize the impulse. And so if this is somebody who maybe is the first time they're getting into this, right? they've been spending a lot of their life being controlled by their thoughts, or even if you're on this journey, but you're still struggling to focus, is to acknowledge that. Acknowledge that you struggle to focus. Acknowledge that these impulses come up. Acknowledge that these thoughts come up. And then, for example, say you're journaling the next time, as soon as the impulse comes up, you just acknowledge it and you recognize it. And the more that you do that, the more that you continue to recognize the impulses, the greater that gap of awareness forms. And the more that you can look to the right of you and see the impulse outside of you and not as you.
So I think that was really well put. I think that this can be a complicated topic to explain because it's such a visceral experience. And I did like how you said, Sophie, how sometimes it is a tangible thing that is a distraction, that can be something that is intrusive, something that we want to avoid. We want to get our phone so we don't have to think about what we're thinking, or we do want to focus on what we're doing, but our brain is telling us to get our phone. And that can stop us from really being in the moment and focusing and getting done what we actually want to get done. So I wanted to give an example that I had going into this Zoom call. Sophie and I are remote, so we were just briefly catching up. And I had an experience arise where I was telling her, if I have this goal, I see in 2024, I'm not going to have to nanny for money anymore. Even though I love it, I'm going to be able to branch out and find other ways to make money through podcast editing. And that's a goal I have going into 2024. And Sophie said that I plan on being out of the state and traveling a lot of the summer. And I felt a lot of anxiety come up and a lot of pressure come up that wanted me to feel really a lot of despair and a lot of anxiety and a lot of pressure. And for about 3 minutes, that was the case. And I was feeling really stressed about it. But then I paused and said, is it summer? No, okay. It's not summer. It's winter. There's a couple seasons before summer. This is not a now problem. This is not a problem in this experience that I'm currently having. And that fear that I have in this experience is not going to help me mitigate that fear from coming into fruition. It's not going to help in any way. And immediately I felt better. Immediately I said, oh, right, that's not a concern of right now. I don't have to listen to this thought, and I don't have to believe what is happening. I can create a separation. I can remember the present moment. I can have this experience without that fear. I can recognize that this happened, but I don't have to embody or experience it. And I think when I say this thing of you don't have to embody it, you don't have to embody the fear or the experience or the thought that is coming up in your mind, you can simply acknowledge it. And I think this is where a huge shift comes, is when we are able to acknowledge and accept where we're at with this. And we don't have to try and fix it by going outside of our mind. We don't have to listen to it. We can create a separation between the thought. And I think it is a very visceral experience. So I hope that story painted a picture of the experience of the questions I ask myself when I do feel that it's hard for me to focus on what I'm doing, because I am going into a podcast. This is something I'm excited for. I know that it helps me feel grounded and it helps me feel present. Even though my thoughts are telling me I'm nervous about X, Y, and Z, that is not applicable to this moment. So that is always a question that I ask myself when I sit down to do anything and I feel any feelings of anxiety arise about anything in the future or any desire to check my phone. I say, is this going to serve me in the future? And is this even applicable in this moment? I think that's the number one question, is is this happening right now? No. Okay, so put it in a far corner of your mind and revisit it at a time where you're not feeling anxious, right? So I think that always questioning things is a great way to learn to create separation and to create distance, because as soon as you question them, you see them as separate from yourself.
Yeah, so I think it's interesting, right? It's we start to, first off, this is all discipline. This journey of separating yourself from your thoughts and the impulses requires effort, in the sense of you have to train yourself to not do it. But I also think it's interesting, there is a component when you are acknowledging, let's just say for me, writing, writing is a really big one. I think anything creative, like maybe we can kind of narrow this into anything creative, because I think that's kind of what the question I interpret it to kind of be, like meditate, journal, or anything where you're trying to do something. Like when I used to go write, I would get so mad. I get so angry. I'd feel like I can't write. I would just get so frustrated. I have all these thoughts come up. I want to grab my phone. And I think the more that I just continued to write and push past that, but there is like this anger that would come up. There is this frustration that would come up about the impulse of like, ugh, why am I feeling this way? Like, I want to just be able to write. I just want to be able to journal. I don't want to have to feel so distracted. And that's where, the thought arises, the impulse arises, and we judge it. We judge ourselves for having that thought. So it's like, I'm going to start writing and I'm judging myself for getting mad at myself. And it's like, that's not helping anyone here. Like, we're not helping anything. We're not helping anyone. And I think that is like a really, really big recognition to have, is that for me, somebody who has been on this journey for a while, I still get these thoughts and impulses all the time. And the difference is that, yes, I've separated myself from them, but I also said to myself the other day, I was feeling really anxious on a walk. And I said to myself, I was like, all right, hey, anxiety, good morning. Thanks for joining us today. I just want to let you know that I'm doing my own thing today. You can hang around here if you want, but like, I'm doing my own thing. So if you want to be here in the room, that's fine. I'm not kicking you out, but I'm going to go outside. Like, I'm going to go and do stuff. And it actually kind of worked. I kind of forgot about it because I stopped thinking about it, but it kind of worked because I was like, hey, like, it's okay, you're here. I'm not going to get mad at you. So I think it's about recognizing that, like, becoming aware of that tendency to want to judge ourselves or get mad at those impulses. Because the more that we do that, I think we're perpetuating. And it's about recognizing that there's nothing wrong with the thoughts that are arising when you're trying to journal or trying to meditate. But it's really the opinion you start to form about them, of saying this is bad, this is wrong, this is whatever. And that's where we get stuck again, because we're stuck again in a thought. We're in a thought about the thought. So all of a sudden, we're in a thought about the anxiety. We don't realize, because we think we're in the clear here. We're like, oh, I'm separate from that anxiety. It's like, no. Separation is through embodiment, through awareness. It's not through thought again. We don't think about being separate from a thought. We experience being separate from a thought. Because as soon as we start thinking about it and forming that opinion, we're back into the same cycle that created the issue in the first place. And just to say, we can't find the answers we are seeking through the vehicle that created the problem itself. Therefore, you cannot solve a problem of thought through thought.
Sophie, you named a really important factor to this that I think was implied within the question of how to deal with distracting thoughts when you're trying to be present, is the fact that we love to judge the actual distracting thoughts and impulses that come up, and we aren't even aware of it. I think that goes without saying, because this question implies that, oh, I don't want to have those impulses and distracting thoughts because I shouldn't be having them. I think that is just part of the question inherently. So I think it's really interesting that you named that. And in order for us to have a feeling about something, we feel like it is part of us. We feel like it is inescapable. We feel like it becomes us. That's why we have a feeling about it, because we start to judge ourselves. And that's where I think two things come into play, of one, creating that separation. Because when we create the separation, it's no longer about us, because there's separation between us and the thought, separation between us and the impulse. And when it is no longer about us, and say it's about someone else, or it's just isolated, standing alone, like, is it such a bad thing for there to be a distracting thought over there by the Christmas tree that I'm pointing to? Is it as powerful? Are you really going to judge the distracting thought or the impulse that is next to the Christmas tree When they walk in the door, the impulse, are you going to be worried about that? Are you going to judge it? Are you going to get mad at yourself? Are you going to feel your body go into fight or flight and anxiety? And are you going to start telling yourself that you're stupid and you're never going to be successful and you can never make money and you can never do this? Are you going to start just saying that out loud when impulse walks through the door? That sounds kind of bizarre. But that's what we do when impulse walks through our door into our mind and we associate it with ourselves and we start to think all these random thoughts that never had anything to do with the impulse, but it's just an excuse for us to bog ourselves down with the insecurities that have always ruled us in the back of our mind that we decide that we are going to either allow them to rule us or we're not. And that's the funny thing about creating the distance. And sometimes it's a process to create that distance. That's why I said there's a second thing where I think when the distracting thoughts are a little bit clingy and they're sticky to us and it's hard to get them off of us and it's hard to get them out the door, a tool for us to work with is acceptance of saying, okay, so, these thoughts are distracting me right now from focusing and writing down. Maybe there's a reason, and that's okay. Because I can't expect there to be a mold that I follow on a day-to-day basis of how things should be. Because each day is different. So maybe in this moment, there is a lesson in the distracting thought that I'm having. And I can say, it's okay that it's there. It's there, and that's all right. And then so starts the separation and the distancing of the thought. And I want to say that as soon as we think the thought shouldn't be there, is when we lose the ability to separate it from ourselves because it's too late. And I don't mean it's too late and you can't distract it, but I mean like we become that distracting thought. We become the judgment of that distracting thought. And it happens really, really quick. So that's why I say ask the questions of, does this really concern me in this exact moment where I stomp my foot in the ground, where I clap my legs on my thighs? Is this really applying to me in this exact moment? If it's not, then I'm going to throw it in the vault. I'm going to lock the door. It's not going to come in because it has nothing to do with me. So that's okay. But creating that separation is so key, and learning to create that separation is key. And it's possible. And we're going to stumble and we're going to mess up, and maybe we'll lock the separation out of the door for 30 seconds and it comes back. But we just keep doing it and we keep doing it and we keep doing it. And that's just fine. And that's how we learn to keep separation with our thoughts at bay for minutes, for hours, for days at a time. And I'll say one more thing on this topic. I think it's recognizing that as we are learning to keep these thoughts at bay, to separate ourselves from these distracting thoughts or these impulses, we're not doing this to get to a place where we will never have distracting thoughts or impulses. The reward is in the moment, is in the 30 seconds that we are able to keep these things at bay. The reward is instant because we're saying, wow, we are actively separating ourselves. And I'm never going to get to a place where I go months and years without these distracting thoughts coming up. I'm just going to get better at further distancing them. So reward yourself in the moment that you're able to recognize that you want to have distance, because that's really fucking exciting, because that's what's going to allow you to have the first building block that you can build billions and billions of blocks upon.
Yeah, that was great. I think also it's like, maybe we recognize we don't need a vault, because maybe it's the vault that is further perpetuating the issue. I want to give the example of like, I used to feel really distracted by noises. I couldn't meditate with noises. I couldn't do work with noises. I couldn't focus with noises. I needed my very specific environment to cultivate to focus. And now I'm able to meditate. Like, you could put me in the middle of New York City streets and I think I could meditate, and I literally have done that when I lived in New York. And it's interesting now because I see that I stopped thinking that those sounds meant anything. I stopped thinking that I couldn't focus if it was loud. I used to think that, if I was in an airport, I couldn't write the essay I had to write for college. I need to go home. I need to be in the library. I need to be very, very focused. But when we think about focus, like, we always are the ones in control of focusing. And I used to think, I have ADD. I have this. I have that. And I want to touch upon what you said, Daisy, about like, as soon as we start thinking that the thought has anything to do with us is when we fall into this trap of getting mad, and so mad that we are opening the vault because we're saying it should be in the vault, because if it's out here, then I'm not okay. I won't be okay if I have these racing thoughts. I won't be okay if I have all these things circulating in my mind. I won't be okay if I have to deal with the fact that this thought's telling me to do this, or that, going on a deeper level, that I'm anxious and I'm fearful. I won't be okay if that's here. And it's funny because I do realize, I see throughout my journey of times where I find myself back into, I don't realize because it gets coded, but I start feeling frustrated. And again, it's because I'm believing thought as a whole. So again, if the thought is telling you to put something in the vault, that again is a problem. Because again, we're thinking we have to get rid of it. Again, we're thinking I'll only be at peace when. I'll only be happy when. And instead of realizing that throughout the rest of our life, as long as we're alive, we can't separate. We will always be with this mind. It would always be next to us, right? But it is our ability that no matter if it's a freaking tsunami going down in our mind, if it's a hurricane, if it's a rainstorm, it doesn't matter, because the weather, our external weather, or any sort of weather doesn't implicate our ability to be at peace. Inner peace is one that exists regardless of anything that's arising. If you're experiencing anxiety, okay, but how seriously am I taking this? How much am I assuming that this thought has anything to do with me and who I am? We forget, right? So I kind of want to just dial back to when you're saying put it into the vault, because like I said to my anxiety the other day, I know you're going to be here in this room, and my anxiety's still somewhere in the house, right? As we're talking, it's still somewhere in the house, but I just went and did other things. I'm not trying to tell it to leave the house, because when I do, that's where I go, why won't I leave? Hello, leave. Ugh, I'm mad. I'm frustrated. Can you leave? Why are you not here? So it's the continuous recognition that it's pretty hilarious, because it's like, by trying to control our thoughts, by trying to control the impulses, by trying to do all these things, we are just fighting against ourselves. And we're starting to think that it has something to do with us, but you are whole and complete in every single moment. You are whole and complete even when you have anxious thoughts. You are whole and complete even when you feel like a loser. You are whole and complete when you can't focus. So if I'm writing the newsletter, and I realize that this newsletter does not implicate my value, my ability to write this newsletter does not implicate my value, then anything that starts to impede on that ability to do that also does not impede in my value, or has little significance or no significance. Because what matters is that I am this vessel of peace that cannot be disrupted by anything. Does that land with you, Daisy?
Yeah, it does. It does. And it's funny because, like you said, when distracting thoughts are in our house, we think that means we can't do anything. We think that when we have distracting thoughts in the house, that means we can't do anything. And that is the furthest thing from the truth. It is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard, and I've experienced it countless times, countless years, and countless years for in countless years. And I saw this really interesting TikTok that I think I'm going to bring into this conversation because it painted a really great picture of this in a lot of ways. And basically it was this guy talking, and he was like, you're sitting in your house right now, you're sitting in your apartment, and you feel like because you have X, Y, and Z problems that are happening right now in your thoughts, they're happening, you think that you can't be the protagonist. You can't be on the hero's journey. But the point of your life is that it's happening in this exact moment with whatever it is in your brain, whatever thoughts you're having, whatever judgments of thoughts that you are having, your time is now. The cameras are filming you. You are on this journey. Someone is turning the pages of your book, because this is the only experience that is happening for you. And it is timed, and it will run out. So if you think that you can't be the protagonist of the story because you're having these judgmental thoughts of yourself that you can't write something right now in this exact moment, you're missing a whole plot line of figuring out, well, why am I judging this? What is happening? And that's why I say the hero's journey of the odyssey back home, of going through the challenges, of going through the breaking down, because that's what allows for an interesting story, is when you allow for everything you thought you knew to be questioned and brought down, especially your thoughts. Because once you start to detach and distance yourself from these thoughts, that's where the interesting journey starts. And that interesting journey can start right now in this moment, because you can question the exact thought of, if you're listening to this podcast and you're thinking, oh, but they've been having these thoughts for years, and they've been questioning these thoughts for years, and they've been doing it, and they have a podcast. How could I ever do any of that? It's not true. It's not true. It's like your journey is this moment. You are the protagonist, and you are the one that gets to take your unique thoughts, and you get to do whatever the hell you want to do with them and let them work with you. And they never have to work against you once you recognize that you can step outside of your apartment, you can step outside your house, and you can have the separation from these thoughts, and you can experience whatever the hell it is that you want to experience.
Well, it's like the cameraman's like, all right, ready to shoot. And you're like, well, I can't start because I have everything. I'm anxious. And he's like, well, that's, we're gonna start filming. Like, we're filming.
You may never get the first take of your life. The camera may never start rolling because you may never feel ready.
Right. Because you think feeling ready means not being anxious. And that's, I've been having more coaching calls recently, and I've been feeling nervous before them. And I actually hosted that workshop a few days ago, and I was feeling nervous before it and anxious. And I remembered our friend Andrew Murnane, he made a video like a few years ago saying, like, just because you're anxious to give that presentation, just because you're nervous to give that presentation, doesn't mean you're not going to give a fucking bomb-ass presentation. Like, we start to think that just because we're anxious, just because the impulses are rising, the thoughts are coming up, the fear is coming up, that means something. And I just want to really, really like narrow this one in, because it is the easiest one to forget, that thoughts are hell. As soon as we start believing our thoughts, even the thoughts that are saying, ugh, I'm annoyed, I'm anxious, that is still another thought. It's judgment. It's the same. You're just transferring over the fear to a new vessel. And it's like the thing, the sheep in the wolf's clothing. It's disguised. It's always disguised because we don't realize. But when you take that deep breath and you go, oh, that was all just spinning around in my mind. The only thing that's happening right now is here. And come back to the moment, come back to your breath, come back to your body. And you can still be in your body with the sandstorm around you. You can be in your body, you can be relaxed, you can be present in the middle of tropical rain. And that's the visualization, right? It's like that rain is our thoughts. That storm is the anxiety. And I think that kind of, answers the question. It's interesting. I think a lot of the time the question really, we look at the question, we find that the questions are beautiful because they help us see that a lot of the suffering comes from our idea that like we shouldn't have the impulses or we shouldn't have the thoughts.
It's funny you say that. And before I jump into what I was going to say, I don't want to leave the listeners with a confusing visual. And I always say this wrong too. It's the wolf in sheep's clothing. Yeah. But I was going to bring it back to this point as well of with the question saying, how do I deal with distracting thoughts when I'm trying to be present? Well, I think the reality is we have this idea that being present means being a Zen Buddhist and a monk with no thoughts. You can see the sound waves in the air because you're so present. And I think that, sure, that is a possible thing to achieve, but the reality of being present is seeing the gnarliest, bushiest forest all around you. It's everywhere. It's entangled. It's every insecurity. It's every worry. It's every concern. You're engulfed in it. and you're constantly engulfed in it, but you have separation from it. You can see that it's all there, but just choose not to take it on in this moment. You see it. It's 2 skips away from you. It's right there. It's ever present, always there. But you have the wherewithal, you have the discipline, and you have the practiced ability to keep it at arm's length. And that is the reality, I think, of present. And then I think presence and flow state are different, because say you're trying to be present while meditating. And I think that's the ultimate thing, because you're not necessarily losing yourself to flow state. Or maybe you are, but it's not as apparent in a way of you're doing something so you stop thinking. But I think that when it comes to accepting that these things are always ever present around us, of our concerns and our insecurities, and they're just at an arm's length, I think the beauty is that when we accept that, we are going to go in these ultra present states that are the flow states, where all of a sudden we've gone from being aware that these things are around us to forgetting anything exists, because we're so tapped into the exact thing that we're doing. So I guess that answers the question. To get into the extreme presence where you forget anything exists, it's to recognize that every concern, insecurity, thought is there, but I don't have to deal with it right now.
And that it doesn't mean anything about me. So it's to keep going, to keep meditating. It's the classic thing of someone who's like, I can't meditate, I have so many thoughts. It's like, you're never going to not. The point is to observe. The point is to recognize that's not you. I can't journal, I have so many racing. Okay, keep journaling. So to answer the question, I think it's really recognizing that we keep moving forward no matter what arises. And it's like if we were to podcast and not if it's like if we were to start podcasting and not keep going because, oh, my insecurities are coming up, oh, this episode's bad. Like I didn't have any today, but in the past, it's like we wouldn't have 50 plus episodes. You just keep going. You put the pen to paper, you keep meditating, you keep writing, you keep doing whatever the hell you're doing without thinking so much about it. And I like Tara Brach's RAIN, recognize, acknowledge, investigate, nurture. There are times where maybe these thoughts indicate something larger. There are times where, I think this is all kind of happening hand in hand as we're giving ourselves love and healing. Maybe I've had times where I realize that the pressure I put on myself while writing is rooted in a lot deeper stuff, but maybe this is not the moment to figure that out. Maybe it is. There's no right or wrong way to do any of this, right? I think we're really trying to give the overarching theme of the separation between us and thoughts and recognizing that that's not you, so that no matter what you're doing, you don't have to fall victim to them.
This was a beautiful question, and we got to this understanding pretty quickly, which I'm pretty proud of, because this is such an important question to ask. And it's an important thing to consider, because it is in everything we do. It's in every moment. It's in every experience. It's something that we will never escape. We'll never bypass. It's something that we have to learn. We have to learn how to do this. It is a skill. And I think with what you were saying, Sophie, it's like it's building the resilience to not be broken by the thought, to not be broken down and to judge the thought. And of course, that's going to happen all the time. But the fun part is coming back from it. The fun part is bouncing back and thinking, that just happened. I fell down, but I'm going to get back up.
Or, oh, I was really caught up in it. Okay, moving on.
Or I just bombed that speech. I just bombed that interview. Well, good fucking job. Good job, because you're not going to let that get you down. Moving on. Keep moving on. That doesn't mean anything about you. It means nothing about you. It was a simple experience that you had. It was a part of your story. It was a part of your experience, and you get to be the one who writes what happens next. And you have total and complete control over that when you have your thoughts at an arm's distance. Because when you do that, you can write what's next without the interference of the judgments and the worries and the concerns. So I'm really grateful for this question. I really learned a lot from this conversation today, and it definitely helped me process the importance of questioning our thoughts, even especially when we're trying to be present, because that is when we need to accept them and let them manifest around us until maybe we get a break. and we're tapped into whatever it is that we're doing. And that's not going to happen every day. And that's great.
And remember that this is a tricky one. When we're trying to be present, we're not being present, because relaxing isn't something you do, it's something you experience. We don't think about relaxing. We don't think about tapping into flow state. We tap into it. So let yourself tap into whatever it is that you're experiencing without thought by relaxing, giving yourself love, recognizing that everything's okay. All you have is right now, and the mind may not think that, but that's okay. We're going to have this mind for as long as we're alive, so we better learn to make some peace with it. Thank you to the listener for writing in this question. I thought it was very thought-provoking and very interesting. So, as always, write to us with your questions. We would love to hear from you. Love to have you in the community series. DM us or info@liveLifeUnpotted.com. This community series is brought to you by our listeners, so continue to write us in. And without further ado, we hope everybody has a nice New Year's Eve, whatever that looks like. To me, I'm going somewhere between of realizing like the year means nothing to me, but it means a lot to me this year also at the same time. So let yourself enjoy whatever meaning it does have, recognizing that there is no right way ever.
And don't forget to have fun with distancing yourself from your thoughts and replacing them with thoughts that you can do anything that you want.
Yeah,
So,
let yourself enjoy, let yourself have fun, let yourself relax, and let go of the pressure. Thanks for listening, everyone. Hope you have a nice weekend. Hope you have a nice New Year's, and we'll talk to you guys on Tuesday.
we'll see you in the new year.